What changes in your body when someone's looking at you? Why does the exact same room, same light, same music, same people sometimes feel like you can breathe, you're comfortable, and other times it feels like you are standing under interrogation lights? How is it possible that attention sometimes really feels warm one moment and like exposure the next moment, even if nothing externally really changed? Maybe the difference has less to do with how confident you are, but it has more to do with your nervous system's interpretation of what's happening. Welcome to this new episode of the Bold Beginner podcast, where I'm going to talk about the difference between being watched and being witnessed. You're listening to The Bold Beginner, a space for multifaceted women where we explore how to feel at ease in your body when you're being seen. If something here speaks to you, consider subscribing or leaving a review or a comment. It genuinely supports the growth of this space. Let's start somewhere very simple. Maybe a scene that you probably know and you're familiar with. Maybe a dinner table where someone says, out of the blue, "Tell us what you're working on." You're about to speak, about to move a little, and you feel all eyes on you. I'm pretty sure I would bet that you've had different outcomes in different situations. Sometimes your body just settles, your arms, gestures are pretty coherent, your breath stays quite stable. You're still very aware that you're being perceived and that people are looking at you, but somehow that perception sharpens you in a way. And you speak in a very clear manner, you're very articulate. And then other times, exact same scenario, and it produces something entirely different. And you're going to start feeling your body stiffen and contract and be all tense. Your movement becomes a bit mechanical, kind of not very natural. You just feel uncomfortable in your own body. And it feels like you utter words that go almost faster than your mind can process or can track them. Sometimes you stutter, you're a bit incoherent, and it's the same room, same action, but two completely different internal climates. And this episode is about that distinction, because I think there's a fundamental difference between being watched and being witnessed. And even sometimes when you don't process it in your mind, your nervous system knows it instantly, and that's long before your mind can name it. And I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's hard to describe very precisely, but I'm sure you felt that many times. In a scenario where you feel watched, your nervous system often interprets the situation through the lens of evaluation. You're asking, am I being measured? Am I being compared? And from a physiological standpoint, it makes sense. There's some research on social evaluative threat that shows that situations that involve uncontrollable evaluations, so evaluations that you didn't ask for, increase cortisol levels far more than stressful situations without social judgment. So in simple words, the body reacts intensely when it perceives that it's being assessed by others in a way that could maybe affect its status, belonging, or safety. So it's a very biological thing. And so when you are being watched in a way that your body, your nervous system perceives as a way that could, impact your status or your safety, it prepares you as always. So the muscles start contracting to protect you. Your breathing becomes more shallow. And just to be clear, it's not necessarily in situations where you're being overly criticized or even explicitly criticized. Even just a sense of I am an object that's being scanned is enough. Being witnessed, however, the other scenario is something completely, entirely different. I chose the word witnessing on purpose because basically it involves presence, you're being looked at, but without consumption, without judgment. If someone is witnessing you when asking you the same question, tell us what you're working on now, they are basically implicitly telling you, I'm here with you. I'm not above you. I see you as a subject, not as an object. So they're not scanning you in the same way, right? And we're talking about the same pair of eyes. Well, usually it's different people, but you know what I'm saying. It's the same context. It's still people looking at you, but it transmits very different information. And I'm sure you felt that many times. It doesn't even take to be in a group setting. Sometimes you have a one-on-one discussion with someone, and two different people will convey very different message to you. With some people, you're going to feel extremely uncomfortable, like they're here to judge you. They're actually waiting for you to make a mistake, waiting for you to fail, to say something embarrassing, to judge you. And the other person is just going to be extremely caring about you. And so when someone makes you feel much more at ease, much more comfortable, and you can tell that they're considering you as a subject and not as an object, you don't prepare for defense. You're not on a defense mode anymore. It only leaves space for connection, for something deeper between two human beings. And usually you feel it in your body, right? You get much more comfortable, your body is relaxed, your gestures make much more sense, your breath synchronizes with your speech, so usually you don't stutter, it just comes very naturally. And you are still seen, but your body realizes that you're not under threat. And it's quite funny to me how these type of situations, these two scenarios, quite often are very, like, the difference between the two is very subtle from the outside, from an external perspective, but it's quite enormous on the inside. And especially for overthinking women, because we're very much in our head a lot of times, and we think too much sometimes what we're going to say, and sometimes we even think while we're talking, which makes us completely lose our thread. And obviously that is multiplied tenfold when we are being watched. But when you're being witnessed, it allows you to remain in your body. Meanwhile, you're still being perceived, but you're not being watched, because being watched, on the opposite, kind of pulls you slightly out of it. Now, I still would like to nuance my thoughts a little bit on that, because that's something I've experienced a lot in the past. Sometimes the room is truly neutral. I don't know if you've experienced that before, but no one is actively judging you, no one is evaluating you, but yet your system reacts a lot like you are under scrutiny. Somehow you feel like you're the center of attention. But that's, of course, because your nervous system doesn't respond to this present situation, but it responds to pattern recognition. And so, of course, we've all had some, micro trauma where maybe you entered a classroom and all your classmates kind of made fun of you because something a bit embarrassing happened. Or it could be something even less dramatic than that, but maybe you had some sort of embarrassing situations in the past. Maybe you've been compared in a certain way. Maybe you've been dismissed in a certain way. And of course, your body remembers. It remembers the tone of voice that some people had. It remembers that one teacher who sighed when you gave a bad response. It remembers the comment about your long limbs, just a random, very completely random example. It, of course, never happened to me, right? But yeah, when you step into a room and you feel watched, your system is most of the time responding to an archive, right? It's not responding directly to the present situation. And so what that means for this specific topic that we're talking about today is that distinction between being watched and being witnessed, sometimes it's happening inside you, not really outside you, or not yet outside you. You actually may be considering whether you are being watched or witnessed before the room has actually decided. Now, I like to, anchor that in the body a lot more. Obviously, we're talking about like the reaction of the body, but I like to understand why all of this matters for movement, for when you want to move. Well, because and obviously I'm always talking specifically about, perceptive, intelligent women, because they're very much in their head and they're used to thinking their way through, the world. The distinction between being watched and being witnessed is very sharp in movement spaces. Whether it's, stretching, yoga, anything that's body related, dance, anything. Because in conversation, you can manage perception with words, right? You're very much in your head and you can have control over what you're going to say. In movement, you feel a bit more exposed, a lot more exposed, actually. Your body is the language. And if the room feels like it is watching, then you might be very well tempted to shrink your movement towards more precision and control. But if the room feels like it is witnessing, then your movement may expand toward more, expression, curiosity. And so a lot of the time when you feel like you're very stiff in class, it has to do with this adaptation to what you perceive as scrutiny. But when you feel like in other environments, you're suddenly very expressive, and maybe in a setting where you're more either in a with a very familiar circle or just with yourself, it's not just by random magic. It's because you feel safe. And so that's why it's so important to create that safety so that you can be rooted in your body and become expressive again. And I really want to be careful here because I don't want to be sounding like every room is actually neutral and it's only perceived scrutiny or your perception of how you're being watched or witnessed, because we all very well know that sometimes people are mean intended. That's just how it is. And it's also very true actually in some competitive areas, and dancing is part of it. I've actually experienced myself a lot of classes or a lot of studios that were absolutely not beginner friendly or not inclusive at all. And that's just a sad truth. So you're very much allowed to, be discerning what you consider witnessing and what you consider watching. And that's why I will never really encourage to just push through and, go to classes unless you're comfortable going, because if you overwhelm your nervous system, it will not be good. It will not actually have the outcome that you hope for. What is important, however, is to create that safety, to find the safe environment for you. And if that safe environment is you alone for now, you alone during your stretching, you alone being expressive, you alone doing some ecstatic dance, you alone doing some yoga, you alone trying to practice your split, you alone twerking in your bathroom, then that's your safe environment. And this is the space that you can work on before slowly expanding your comfort zone. But the only thing I'm going to ask here is to actually make your awareness more acute. And maybe the next time that you are in a room and you feel that subtle shift when attention lands on you, maybe instead of labeling it insecurity or, instead of immediately assuming that you're being scrutinized, just pause or observe and ask yourself, am I experiencing scrutiny or am I experiencing presence, witnessing? Sometimes it's going to be unclear and it's completely fine. You can always reflect on a moment later. You don't have to have the answer straight away in the moment. But it's really good to start noticing these things and building your awareness around that. Because once you begin to notice, you cannot unsee it.